Welcome, deep divers. Today, we're digging into something pretty huge, a really ambitious vision for India. We're talking about the goal of becoming a $55 trillion economy by 2047.
55 trillion.
Yeah, I mean, just to put that in perspective for you, the U.S. economy right now, it's, a bit over $25 trillion.
That's right.
So India aiming for more than double that size in just over 2 decades. It's a massive transformation we're discussing.
It really is a profound shift.
And our deep dive today, it's based on a really compelling conversation with Dr. K.V. Subramanian. He's the executive director at the IMF now, and he was previously the chief economic advisor to the government of India.
Yes, and author of India at 100, a very insightful book.
Exactly. India at 100, envisioning tomorrow's economic powerhouse. So we're going to explore, is this vision just, a dream? Or is it actually tangible, and what would it really take to get there?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe let's start at the beginning. What's the story behind this huge ambition? How did India even get to a point where this feels possible?
Well, it's interesting. Dr. Subramanian starts his book with a very personal story.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, about his father facing financial hardship, couldn't continue his education. But then the post-1991 liberalization reforms, they changed things. They enabled Dr. Subramanian's own journey.
And that kind of mirrors the rise of India's middle class, doesn't it?
Precisely. It shows how these big macro changes really do filter down to individual lives. But, beyond the personal stories, what did liberalization mean for the country as a whole?
Right, on a national scale.
Well, what's fascinating, I think, is how that fundamental shift towards competition just unleashed capability everywhere. It proved that, healthy rivalry can be a really powerful engine.
Competition as the key.
Yeah. Look at the numbers. In 1947, India's GDP per capita was around $2,730.
Yeah.
Okay? But by 1991, because of, what some call Nuvian socialism, basically very centralized, state-controlled economy, stifling private enterprise, that figure dropped.
Dropped to how much?
To just $300. We'd lost nearly 9 times that initial level. It's quite stark.
Wow.
But then, post-liberalization, India didn't just get back to that $2,730 level. We've multiplied it 9 times since then. We're now at, around a $3.3 trillion economy.
And the driver was competition.
The core benefit, yes. Think about the media. You went from one state channel, Doordarshan, to this incredibly competitive landscape today. That competition, it forces efficiency, it builds capability, and ultimately, it lifts overall welfare.
That historical turnaround really sets the scene, doesn't it? From decline to recovery, powered by competition. Which brings us to this, incredibly ambitious goal, $55 trillion by 2047. It still sounds almost unimaginable, going from $3.3 trillion now.
It does raise an eyebrow initially.
So what's the rigorous thinking behind it? How do we know it's more than just, wishful thinking?
Well, look, connecting it to the bigger picture. Sustained high growth isn't just theory. It's happened. It's a historical pattern for ambitious economies. The optimism isn't based on just hope. It's rooted in data, in economic analysis.
Like other countries have done this kind of leap.
It's exactly. Take Japan. Between 1970 and 1995, its nominal GDP grew 25.6 times. Went from $220 billion to $5.5 trillion in 25 years.
25 times. Oh.
Or China. From 1996 to 2021, its GDP multiplied 22 times. It just shows the incredible power of compounding over, say, a 25-year period.
So compounding is key. And for India, the target implies what kind of multiplication?
We were talking about a 16 times increase. And the calculation for that, it's quite specific. It's not just plucked out of thin air.
Okay, break that down for us. How do you get to 16 times?
Right. So you start with a target for real growth. Let's say 8%. Now, that's a stretch goal, yes, but India has hit 7% historically, and with potential productivity gains, 8% is, ambitious, but potentially achievable.
Okay, 8% real growth, then what?
So you had inflation. Let's assume 5%. That seems reasonable, especially with the inflation targeting we've had post-2016. So 8% plus 5% gives you 13% nominal growth in rupees.
13% nominal growth, got it. But that's in rupees. We need dollars for the big target, right? So depreciation comes in.
Exactly. Rupee depreciation. Historically, it's been around 3.5% per year. But the thinking is it should be less than 1% going forward.
Less than 1%? Why such a big drop from 3.5%?
Because lower inflation means slower currency erosion. See, historically, we had maybe 7.5% inflation, which pushed depreciation up. If we manage to keep inflation around 5%, that 2.5% difference directly reduces the pressure on the rupee. So that shaves off at least 2.5% for the depreciation rate, bringing it under 1%.
The inflation depreciation link. Okay, so 13% nominal growth minus less than 1% depreciation.
Gets you an effective nominal dollar growth of about 12%.
12%, okay.
Now, you might know the rule 72. It's a quick way to estimate doubling time. Divide 72 by the growth rate.
Right, 72 divided by 12 is 6, so doubling every 6 years.
Precisely. Doubling every 6 years. Now, look at the time frame, 2023 to 2047. That's 24 years.
6 years doubling over 24 years, that's 4 doubling.
4 doublings, so 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, that equals 16 times.
16 times, there it is.
And starting from, say, $3.28 trillion in 2023, multiplying by 16 gets you around $52 trillion,
right,
which is very close to that $55 trillion goal.
Wow. Okay, when you lay it out like that, the math holds up.
And it's important to stress this isn't based on just simple assumptions. It's about, building it ground up, testing the framework on past periods. There are entire chapters in the book on investment rates, productivity, making sure it's robust.
That's reassuring. But let's get real for a second. The world. It's volatile, isn't it? Pandemics, wars, climate shocks, unexpected headwinds are almost guaranteed over 25 years. How does that factor in? Can these calculations withstand major disruptions?
That's a critical point, absolutely.
Yeah.
And history is again our guide here. Think about Japan's 26-fold growth from 1970 to 95. That wasn't exactly a calm period.
You had the Vietnam War, oil shocks.
Exactly. Major oil shocks, hyperinflation in the U.S., or China, growing 22 times from 96 to 2021. They navigated the global financial crisis. They navigated COVID. So headwinds, yes, they'll always be there over a long period. But crucially, so will tailwinds. The absolute focus has to be on maintaining that growth trajectory, managing the domestic levers well. Like a top athlete, India will face challenges, but the potential is there if the hard work and policy focus remain.
So managing the controllable factors, the domestic ones, becomes even more critical.
Absolutely critical. And this raises an important point. If we manage our domestic policies well, we can actually ride out many international disruptions much better than people think. Governments can't just blame global factors beyond a point.
How insulated is India, really, given globalization?
Well, look at the GDP makeup. Roughly 60% is domestic consumption, about 30% is domestic investment, maybe 10% government spending. Exports and imports matter, of course, but that large domestic base means that direct global impact is often overestimated.
So even things like, say, conflict in West Asia and oil price spikes, their impact isn't as huge as we might assume.
The direct impact, quantitatively, is often less than perceived. On the fiscal deficit, it's limited now because fuel prices are largely passed on. On inflation, oil might contribute, say, 15% of the overall basket movement. A $1 increase in oil might impact overall inflation by maybe 0.06%. So, yes, it matters, but the impact on overall consumption isn't overwhelming if the domestic economy is strong.
That shifts the focus inward quite dramatically. You mentioned domestic policy, but where does the real action happen, central government?
This brings us to something often overlooked. The absolutely critical role of state governments.
State level, why so critical?
Because around 80% of the policies that directly affect manufacturing, things like land acquisition, labor laws, electricity cost, the day-to-day ease of doing business, that's state jurisdiction.
80%, that's huge.
It is. But look at the attention disparity. The central budget gets intense scrutiny, right?
Yeah.
Hours of analysis. State budgets, they often just fly under the radar. There's enough demand for accountability from citizens, from industry bodies like CII or FICCI.
So you're saying states haven't pulled their weight?
Look, it's fair to say that overall, states have actually been a bit of a disappointment over the last 30 years in terms of deep reforms. And that has to change if India is to hit this potential. We need to focus on our own team, manage our risks well. Risk and return go together. We need well-managed risk for higher growth, not zero risk. And yes, while India is more globally integrated, the impact of something like, say, the U.S. election outcome is probably marginal compared to getting our own house in order.
Focus on our team. That's a good way to put it. Okay, let's shift focus slightly. China. India's neighbor, facing its own economic slowdown, structural issues. Many companies are looking for a China plus one strategy. Is this a real opportunity for India?
It's a very real opportunity, yes.
Yeah.
China's slowdown isn't just cyclical, it looks structural. You've got demographics, a declining workforce, an over-reliance on investment rather than consumption. Stimulus might provide temporary relief, but the deep issues remain.
So India can potentially pick up some of that manufacturing slack?
Potentially, yes. We're already seeing some positive signs. Manufacturing grew at nearly 10% last year, even on strong GDP growth. Semiconductors are showing momentum. But we circle back to those state level reforms.
It always comes back to that, doesn't it?
It does. We need subordinate labor laws passed quickly, easier land acquisition, cheaper power. You hear stories about setting up a factory in China. The local official has everything ready here. Well, it can be much harder. Democracy is messy, sure, but we need to aim for much faster turnaround time, say 2 weeks for permissions.
Reduce that friction. What about the argument that India is mostly assembling, not truly manufacturing with deep value addition?
That's a common critique, but it's often how industries start. Think about Maruti cars back in the late 80s. It began largely with imported Suzuki components. Over decades, the local supply chain developed. Assembly is often the first step.
So we're on the path, just need to accelerate.
We're on the right track, yes. But speed. I admit, I tend to get impatient on speed. We need to move faster to capture this window and graduate to more value-added manufacturing. And it's not purely economics either. There's a geopolitical angle.
Right. The trade relationship with China is complex.
Very.
Yeah.
You have to balance economic efficiency with strategic considerations. The color of the money matters sometimes.
Yeah.
Look at Europe now, putting higher tariffs on Chinese EVs, even if it causes some short-term pain. It shows a global shift, perhaps validating India's earlier, more nuanced approach sometimes. The debate on pure economics versus broader national interest is crucial.
Absolutely. Okay, let's turn to maybe the most critical domestic issue. Jobs. You famously emphasized jobs, jobs, and jobs. Why is this paramount, especially when we hear narratives about jobless growth or AI taking over?
Jobs are, I believe, the single most important national imperative. Why? Because a decent job doesn't just lift one person or family, it can lift generations.
Like your father's story.
Exactly. His job in the railways enabled education for my brother and me. We need millions of such stories. Jobs bring social inclusion, economic inclusion, confidence. They build support for reforms. And manufacturing specifically is key for creating those high-quality, skilled, relatively secure jobs.
Moving from, say, informal work to a factory job.
Yes. A housekeeper moving to a manufacturing role earns more, gains skills, has more certainty. Plus, as the middle class grows, if we don't manufacture enough consumer goods domestically, we just end up importing them. We need those jobs here.
But what about the jobless growth narrative? Is it real?
Well, that narrative, often fueled by certain private data sources like CMI, which sometimes face methodological questions, I think it's run ahead of the reality depicted by high-quality government data.
What does the government data show?
Look at the Periodic Labor Force Survey, the PLFS, from 2017 to 2023. It shows clear improvements. Unemployment rate down, labor force participation up, worker population ratio up, and crucially, the quality of work seems to be improving too with more salary jobs.
Any specific numbers on job creation?
An RBI report, using the globally respected CLEMS database, estimated about 90 million non-agricultural jobs were created in India in the last 10 years alone. 90 million. That's significant.
That definitely challenges the dominant narrative. Okay, but then there's AI, the elephant in the room. Won't technology just automate away these jobs eventually?
History suggests technology changes the nature of jobs more than it eliminates them outright. Think about U.S. Census data. 1960 versus 2020. Out of about 40 broad job categories, only one really disappeared: elevator operators.
Right. And ATMs didn't kill bank teller jobs.
Exactly. Tellers' roles changed. They focus more on customer service, sales, and new jobs were created maintaining and supplying the ATMs. AI is different. Yes, it impacts white-collar work more directly. Think software developers using ChatGPT for code. But again, it seems more likely to transform roles rather than eliminate them wholesale.
And you see an opportunity for India with AI.
A significant one. We have this amazing public digital infrastructure generating vast amounts of data, and our linguistic diversity across states is actually a huge advantage for training certain types of AI models. We shouldn't just fear AI, we should leverage it.
Leverage it, okay. Now, another term we hear is the middle income trap. Is India at risk of getting stuck there on its way to $55 trillion?
I don't believe India is structurally in a middle income trap. That definition is often applied too broadly anyway. Our growth trajectory shows clear upward movement. But we can learn from countries, say in Latin America, that did get stuck.
What's the lesson there?
The need for dynamic economic policy. You can't just set a policy and forget it. You have to constantly refine your models as the economy evolves. Think about the production-linked incentive schemes, the PLI.
Read the subsidies for manufacturing.
Yes. It's like parenting. You handhold the nascent industry when it can't compete globally. That's fine. But there must be a clear expectation that the support will be withdrawn once it matures. Otherwise, if subsidies are seen as permanent, the industry never builds its own capabilities. It becomes dependent.
So temporary support, not permanent protection.
Exactly. It's about creating an environment for innovation, for thriving individuals, continually adapting. That's how you avoid traps and build resilience.
Which brings us to innovation and entrepreneurship. How do we foster that?
Well, risk is inherent in entrepreneurship, isn't it? What policy can do is reduce the unnecessary risks, the friction. Ease of doing business is paramount here.
And are we seeing progress there?
The data suggests so. World Bank figures show that between 2004 and 2014, the annual rate of new firm creation was about 3.2%. From 2014 to 2024, with more policy focus on ease of business, that rate jumped almost 200%.
200% increase in new firm creation rate.
Yes, that saves startups precious time and resources. And the innovation ecosystem is improving, generally. India climbed from 85th on the Global Innovation Index in 2015 to 39th now. Things like the National Research Foundation, the budget allocations, they help.
But is government funding enough?
That's the key question.
Yeah.
The private sector really needs to step up its R&D spending. In India, it's roughly 2/3 public funding, 1/3 private. In advanced economies, it's the reverse.
So we need companies investing more in research.
Yes. Perhaps more corporate venture capital arms, like Dell Ventures or Intel Capital. India Inc. needs to foster that innovation pipeline more actively.
And linking back to jobs, what about the skills needed for these innovative manufacturing-focused roles? Are we training people effectively?
Skill development. That's been a challenge. Past efforts haven't always delivered the results we hoped for.
So what's the solution?
I think the focus needs to be more on demand-side skilling. Internship programs look promising because people learn actual on-the-job skills. They learn the work culture.
Learning by doing.
Exactly. And for manufacturing specifically, those industrial training institutes, the ITIs, are critical. The firms that plan to hire from these ITIs should be deeply involved in setting the curriculum, maybe even a franchise model where companies run parts of the ITI training, aligning the supply of skills with the actual demand from industry. That's crucial.
Aligning supply and demand. Makes sense. Okay, one final area. Your current role at the IMF gives you a unique perspective on global debt. What's your advice to countries struggling with high debt, maybe even facing a so-called Chinese debt trap?
The fundamental advice is always implement good economic policies. And crucially, distinguish between good debt and bad debt.
Good versus bad debt. How do you define them?
Bad debt is borrowing for things like revenue expenditure, unsustainable freebies, or just, wasteful spending that doesn't create future value. That's a sure recipe for a debt trap, often linked to poor governance.
And good debt.
Good debt is taken for asset creation. Building infrastructure, investing in capital expenditure that will generate returns down the line. India took on debt during COVID, but much of it was directed towards CapEx, with a clear plan for the debt to GDP ratio to come back down towards 80%.
It's like a household borrowing for a house versus a vacation?
Precisely. One builds an asset, potentially increases productivity, the other is consumption. So when the IMF steps in, it's often like a doctor administering medicine that's necessary, even if it's bitter.
Bitter medicine.
Yes, and it's often medicine the government should have taken itself much earlier, before things got critical. You don't blame the doctor for the bitter taste if it's needed to cure the disease, right? The real focus has to be on preventing the disease-sound fiscal management, ensuring debt is used productively for asset creation.
Wise words. We've covered so much ground today, from the ambitious $55 trillion goal and the math behind it, to the critical role of states, the China Plus opportunity, and the absolute imperative for jobs, skills, and innovation. It's clear this vision requires strategic thinking, seizing opportunities, but most of all, relentless domestic focus and action. The rigorous analysis you've shared, based on Dr. Subramanian's work, is truly insightful.
Well, ultimately, India's journey, if it unfolds this way, will be a testament to focused effort and constant adaptation.
Adaptation is key.
It is. So maybe a final thought for you, our listeners.
Yeah.
As you look at your own work, your own plans, are you building just for the short term? Or are you consciously creating assets, building capabilities that will compound and grow over the next 25 years, regardless of the headwinds you might face? Something to reflect on.